1 week from today, that's right, Election Day coming up next Tuesday, although many of you might be voting early, voting by mail. A reminder, those have to be in the mail by tomorrow. Joining us right now in studio is Republican candidate for Arizona's Secretary of State, Steve Gaynor. Mr. Gaynor, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you?
So far, so good. Obviously, we are close to the election. You're out, you're campaigning. And one of the things, and we wanted to jump right in with you. First off, and I want to understand this. Have you ever held elected office before?
I have not.
This is your first time running?
It is.
Okay, good. So one of the things, and I just mentioned that there are people out there right now that may have their ballots on their kitchen counter.
I got mine right here.
Oh, look at that.
Yes, I'm filling it out today because it needs to go in the mail today.
And dropping it in the mail and getting it in there. Where do you come down on early voting, this type of voting by mail, et cetera?
It clearly is the most convenient way for most people. 75 to 80% of people vote that way.
In the state of Arizona?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's very popular.
It is very popular.
But is it popular with you? Do you like people voting by mail?
I do it myself.
Okay.
Yeah. And the only issue that I see with it is that I've looked at some of the signature verification procedures.
Okay.
I think that could be improved. But
we had a conversation about that yesterday. It wasn't the state of Arizona. It was other states where ballots were being rejected because the signatures.
It was Maricopa County.
Oh, it was Maricopa County. Signatures didn't match, and Pamela and I having the discussion that I don't know if my signature ever looks the same twice, much less the one I put on a voter ID card 20 years ago.
Exactly. And the other thing is a lot of the way signatures are captured are at the MVD. And they have a pin pad where you don't sign with ink.
You sign with your fingertip, and God knows what that looks like.
Right. So I think the signature capture and verification process should be improved. But aside from that, I think vote by mail is great.
Okay. So you're not concerned about fraud regarding voter mail?
I've heard from some people, not so much fraud, but ballots out there that probably shouldn't be. What do
you mean by that? What do you mean?
Well, I'll tell you. I've gotten a number of contacts through my website of people who receive ballots for people who are deceased.
Okay.
People who have moved.
So voter rolls that are not accurate?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And so to me, it's an opportunity for fraud because somebody can fill out the ballot, sign it with a somewhat illegible signature, and turn it in. But to me, the main concern is that the voter rolls are not accurate, and that needs to be improved.
Because when it comes to voter fraud, I mean, we haven't had many cases in Arizona. Even if somebody has voted on behalf of somebody who has passed away or somebody who has moved, I mean, here in our state, we investigate those. And I think that 30 had been turned into the Attorney General's office, 20 went for convictions. So while I think getting voter rolls up to date, very, very important, I don't think that they're necessarily ripe for fraud. So I just want to be clear, as someone who would be responsible for elections in Arizona, when it comes to voter mail-in ballots, you stand where, sir?
Oh, I think that they'll continue, and they should.
Good.
Very good.
Again, joining us in studio right now, Republican candidate for Arizona Secretary of State, Steve Gaynor. Something kind of different about the state of Arizona. Maybe you come from somewhere else. The Secretary of State in Arizona is number 2 in line for the governorship and our succession plan, hierarchy, however you want to refer to it as. That's not common in most states. It's reasonably unique in the state of Arizona. Also, we just mentioned the top election official, the Secretary of State, is in this state. I want to get back to something else, and these are the comments you've made that at least I'm aware of, and to give you a chance to confirm or deny. Printing ballots or election material in Spanish. Is that an issue? Is we currently do, as I understand it. As a matter of fact, I got the pamphlet with my mail-in, and one side's English, the other side's Spanish. Is that an issue?
Not for me. And so to understand, the language on the ballot is a function of federal law. Mm-hmm. Every 10 years we have a census, and based on census data, that comes back to the federal government. The federal government decides for each area, and I believe for the most part it's by county, what language appears on the ballot.
If there is a predominant different language being spoken other than English in that county.
That plus there are education requirements also.
Okay.
So there's education attainment and predominant language. In my understanding, that's what determines what appears on the ballot.
Again, we were speaking to the Republican candidate for Secretary of State here in Arizona. And sir, I think the reason why we're asking you about who and what kind of language should be printed on the ballots is because of some comments you made in August.
We have a population that is Spanish speaking. I would be the first to say it shouldn't be. Ballots, information pamphlets, all the material in our country should be in English.
That sounds a little different than what you just said as far as the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Am I missing something?
No, I did say it, but what I'm saying to you is, as a public official, I would uphold the law. The law is that ballots appear in whatever language the federal government determines, and that's the way it would be. The other thing is Secretary of State, excuse me, does not print ballots. The county officials do. The Secretary of State oversees the counties to see that they do what they're supposed to do under the law. So, to give you a perspective, I think it would be great in our country if English was predominant, because from the standpoint of people attaining success and participation, it would be great if
assimilating.
Yes, if that could be the case. And I'm from an immigrant background myself, so I very well understand the immigrant experience, having English and other languages in the home. So it didn't come from an anti-immigrant place. It came from the fact that I think in our country we could do a better job helping people assimilate. And I'll tell you, yes, we have many Hispanics here, but we have a lot of other immigrant communities, Assyrians, Greek, Russian, and I know people in many of those communities. They don't get the advantage of their language on the ballot. But I think as a country, we could do a better job helping people to assimilate.
So by assimilating and helping them to assimilate, would you want that law changed then to
No.
make it English only?
No, I'm not. I'm not pursuing that. I think eventually, if we do the right thing by our immigrants, that the whole issue will fade away.
And I went and researched this just because I was curious. We had a proposition decades ago, English only ballot initiative that passed in the state of Arizona.
About 12 years ago.
12 years
Wasn't that
ago?
long ago?
Well,
yeah.
Prop 103, did I get that right?
I don't know about
it
the
was
prop.
passed, but it was found to be unconstitutional. So the idea of English only, it's already been ruled on by the courts. It's not an option, as far as I can understand, as how the courts have determined things like government documents, ballots, et cetera. Joining us right now in studio, Steve Gaynor is the Republican candidate for Arizona Secretary of State, the highest election official in the state of Arizona. Thank you again for joining us in the studio.
My pleasure.
So we talk about the ease of voting by mail, and we mentioned earlier, and you're certainly in favor of that, and it seems wildly popular in the state of Arizona. But as what do I use it to? The statistics we have as a percentage of the population, eligible voters, we don't do a very good job as the state of Arizona in eligible voters participating in the electoral process. Are there hindrances along the way? Is there things that, as Secretary of State, you could do to make it, dare I say, easier or for people to vote, engage more people in the political process?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are two different things you're talking about.
Please.
One is ease. The other is engagement.
Yeah.
I think voting by mail is about as easy as it can get. There are places in the country where they are experimenting with voting by phone or through some digital method.
That scares me a little bit.
I really don't like that idea.
Okay, you and I are on the same page on that.
No, I think our technology has not advanced to the point where we could count on something like that. Paper ballots, I think, really are best, and in Arizona, that's what we use, which is great. As far as engagement, what I would like to do, one of the things I want to do if I'm elected, is go to schools and not only register kids who turn 18, but have them learn about and understand the basis for voting, learn about the Constitution, learn about their rights, so that when they come to the idea of voting, they understand it. They understand the importance of it, not just that they're registered and they can do it, but how important it is. And so have them engage with it intellectually so they understand why it's so important. And I think we have some people in our midst who really don't care.
Agreed. And never will, maybe.
Right. The engagement, you can register to vote, but to actually get people out on Election Day is an entirely different ballgame. Again, we're speaking to Steve Gaynor. He is the Republican nominee who is looking for your vote next Tuesday.
Or right now.
Or
if you
right
had it in
now,
front of you.
exactly,
Right now,
for Secretary of State. And like you pointed out at the beginning when we first sat down to talk with Mr. Gaynor, the Secretary of State in Arizona is second in charge, really, in all honesty.
Yeah. It's like a lieutenant governor position type thing in many other states.
In other states, how that is handled. So I'm interested in your thoughts with some of the bigger state issues. Yes, the election is one of the major things that, you would be responsible for if you win on Tuesday. But our border, south of the state, our southern border, and what has been going on down there. And we have news that the Pentagon has just signed off on some 5,200 military personnel going down along the border. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. What do you think needs to be done along our southern border with immigration being such an important issue to the people here in Arizona?
It is an important issue. And one thing that I didn't realize until I ran, and I spent a lot of time in our rural communities, is that it's not just immigration, but it's drugs. We have a very significant drug problem in our rural communities, and it is directly affected by what's coming over the border. It's not just people, it's drugs. And the rural communities are struggling with this, so border security it's people, but it's also opioids.
Anti-drug.
Yeah. It's a very difficult problem. I think it's unfortunate that at the federal level, in Congress, and with the administration, they don't seem to have been able to come to a conclusion about it. And it's become a political football. The first thing you have to recognize is you have a problem, and then you have to find a solution. Do I think that people should just willy-nilly come across our border illegally? No. And, the interesting thing is when you think about it, if you fly into JFK and you're here illegally, you cannot enter. The government stops you.
They turn you around, put you on a flight back wherever you came from.
Right. But if you walk across the border into someone's ranch and you're apprehended, you're not sent back. Mm-hmm. So it's a real problem, and it's certainly a problem for our state. We have a lot of people coming in and the threat of a lot more. It needs to be handled. It needs to stop.
Yeah, I think immigration is a huge issue in the state of Arizona. And it was one that President Trump touched upon when he made his visit to Mesa. What was that, 2 weeks ago? My goodness.
Was it already 2 weeks ago? No,
it's blurry.
It couldn't have possibly been 2 weeks ago.
It might even been longer than that.
Wow.
But I want to get your thoughts, sir. We're talking again to Steve Gaynor. He is the Republican candidate running for Secretary of State here in Arizona. At that rally, there were several news reports of you kind of rallying up the crowd and getting them to chant fake news, fake news, fake news. Yeah. Did you do it? If so, why? And what do you think that benefits?
Well, it wasn't. I didn't try to get them to say that. They, on their own, recognized that.
Did you engage with that? Did you chant too?
No. But I did make the point that I felt the administration had made progress in many areas, and that was not well covered, that the news has been largely negative about the administration, and I think objectively that's the case. So when I made that point, the crowd chose to respond that way, which was fine.
Do you think any of the rhetoric is leading to some of the division? Is the rhetoric a problem today? I mean, we're dealing with funerals in Pittsburgh. We had a mail bomber sending stuff through the mail. Is rhetoric at all responsible for any of that?
Responsible is one thing. I do think the rhetoric on both sides is pretty heated and not always constructive. Personally, I don't go that way. If I have differences with someone, I don't try to shout them down. I try to understand their point of view, and if I disagree, persuade them to mine. So that's my approach.
Hear, hear. We appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Music lets me know we're out of time. Steve Gaynor, Republican candidate for Secretary of State, with us in studio. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your answers. We appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me on.
Outstanding.
I'm Bob McClay. Here's our top story.